Georges Clemenceau, popularly known as the Tigre or Le Tigre, was a leader of the French Third Republic, a key player in the Allied triumph in World War I, and a key architect of the post-war Treaty of Versailles. He was born on September 28, 1841, in the western French seaside department of Vendée. His father, a Voltairian and enthusiast for the French Revolution of 1789, molded him and remained as his role model throughout his life. As a result of his father's connections, he came into contact with historians and revolutionaries, experiences that would heavily influence young George. In November 1861, George went to Paris to study medicine. There, in the Latin Quarter in Paris, he met members of the Republican opposition. It was during that time that Clemenceau and a group of friends started a newspaper called Le Travail, Work, to convey the views that would shape his political career. He left France after completing his studies and spent the following 4 years, 1865 to 69, in the United States. To him, American democracy represented a new level of discussion and expression that differed greatly from that in France. Following the refusal of his father to continue to fund his education, he began working as a teacher in Stamford, Connecticut. 5 days after his marriage to one of his students, Mary Plummer, Clemenceau went back to France and became a doctor in Vendée. In July 1870, Napoleon III declared war on Germany. But in less than 2 months, the French were routed at Sedan, and the imperial regime came to an end. Clemenceau was elected to the National Assembly in Bordeaux as a radical Republican delegate to represent the Seine department on February 8, 1871. But when he went to Paris, he failed to mediate between the leaders of the Paris Commune and the National Assembly, which was meeting in Versailles at the time. As a result, he stepped down as mayor on March 27, 1871. But his political career didn't stop after that early stumble. A few years later, he won the 18th arrondissement election in 1876. He rose to prominence among the radicals as a result of his ferocity and oratory skills. He rapidly became a political critic of Republicans, radicals, and conservatives, as well as a destroyer of ministers who refused to join the government during Jules Grévy's presidency, 1879-87. His corrosive political influence drew a growing number of opponents, and as a result his involvement in the Panama Canal scandal of 1892 provided an unparalleled opportunity for retribution for all. As a journalist, he rose to prominence as one of his generation's most important political writers. He was considered a man of thought, culture, and acquaintance with the most prominent writers and artists of his day. In addition, he produced a play that he wrote. The Dreyfus Affair, which raged in France from 1894 until 1906, compelled him to write about it as a journalist. Clemenceau fought for 8 years, 1897 to 1905, to defend Dreyfus's innocence in La Justice and L'Aurore. Clemenceau was re-elected to the Senate in April 1902 as a result of his support for Dreyfus. When Ferdinand Serine's government fell apart in October 1906, Clemenceau was installed as prime minister as a result. His tenure witnessed important events, like the vital alliance with England in 1907, and the standoff against Germany over Morocco in 1909. However, Clemenceau resigned from office on July 20, 1909, after a tense and unexpected clash with the prominent politician Théophile Delcassé. Believing that Germany was a belligerent power intent on war, he conducted extensive research into the state of France's arsenal, fearing that France would be caught off guard once more. In May 1913, he founded a new daily magazine, L'Homme Libre, in order to popularize his pro-rearmament views. In 1914, he turned nationalist in response to the outbreak of war, urging all French citizens to join the battle. As the conflict progressed, apathy and pacifism set in. But he was among the first to warn the public about complacency. In November 1917, Poincaré turned to Clemenceau for help and urged him to form a government. Despite his advanced age, he was able to form a government in which he served as both war minister and premier simultaneously. Clemenceau had just one goal in mind: winning the war. Everything else was secondary. With his help, Ferdinand Foch was elevated to the position of sole commander of the Allied forces in March 1918. Despite the German military resurgence in the spring of 1918, Clemenceau remained steadfast in his resolve. He declared war on Germany to the last quarter hour, for the last quarter hour is ours. After the defeat of the Germans on November 11, 1918, Clemenceau desired an unbreakable peacetime alliance following the wartime partnership. While the Treaty of Versailles was being drafted, Clemenceau's objective was to balance France's interests with those of Britain and America. He was also adamant on disarming Germany. In the Hall of Mirrors of the Versailles Chateau, where William I had himself proclaimed German emperor in 1871, he insisted on signing the Treaty of Versailles on June 28, 1919. Meanwhile, the French Assembly grew disgruntled, having been excluded from discussion during the negotiations. On November 16, 1919, a new Chamber of Deputies was elected, and Clemenceau expected their support because many were veterans of the past war. But the politicians couldn't forgive him for excluding them from both the war and the peace discussions. Clemenceau also lost the presidential election on January 17, 1920. Old and humiliated, Clemenceau decided to cease all his political involvement. And after a bustling life lived in retirement, Georges Clemenceau finally died in Paris, on November 24, 1929, at the age of 88.